go live here as well. It's just preparing. Get started in about a minute. So I can already see quite a few people joining. So thanks for joining us today. All right. Okay. All right, I believe we can begin slowly. I can see that we've got quite a few participants already. So welcome everybody today to this webinar, Status Quo in HR Tech. My name is Justin Lestel. I'm the Marketing Director at DevSkiller. Before we get started, I've got a couple of quick housekeeping things to go through. So first of all, this webinar is being recorded. So if you can't make it to the end of the webinar today, or if you'd like to share it with your colleagues, you'll be receiving a link to the webinar tomorrow morning at the latest. The second thing is this webinar is an interactive session, so we've got a number of polls. So I strongly encourage you to get involved with the polls. We're going to be discussing them with our panelists, who I'll introduce shortly. And last but not least, there will be a Q&A session at the end of today's webinar. So if you've got any questions you'd like to ask directly to our panelists, you can fire them in the Q&A section on the bottom of your screen. And finally, sorry, one more thing. We will also be making a donation today for every attendee who joins the webinar today to the Humanitarian Aid Fund for Ukraine. So your attendance is going to a good cause today. So thank you for attending today. All right, so now with those housekeeping things out of the way, I might start with our introduction. So I might start with you, CJ. Can you just give us a few words about yourself?
Yeah, sure. Hi, everyone. Great to be here. My name is CJ. I work as a product manager at Teamtailor, an ATS and employer branding platform based out of Sweden. And my journey here has been winding, I guess you could say. I started out as a developer and then built my own agency, which was later acquired. And after that acquisition, I took on the role as head of HR in that startup that acquired us. And that on paper seems like an unlikely route maybe, but running an agency, it's all about the people and the culture. That's always important in every company, of course, but in an agency, that's also the product basically that you're selling. So that's where I was putting most of my focus in that role. So in that sense, the transition to head of HR actually at another HR tech startup felt really natural. And I did that for 4 years, working very, very focused on recruiting developers. That was probably where I spent most of my time. And that's when I really dug into Teamtailor. I'd been using it before, but now I was using it on a daily basis and really loving it. And so then when my time ended at the HR tech startup, I got an opportunity to actually join Teamtailor and be part of building the product there. So that's been a wonderful journey so far. I'm 1 year into that, but I love how it kind of tied all of these different HR tech threads together, from developer to building a team and the culture in the company and doing a lot of recruiting, to now actually combining those by building a recruiting focused HR tech product. So yeah, that's awesome. A bit about me.
Thank you. Yeah, we're very excited to tap into some of that experience, quite varied, and I think it's going to play well today in the webinar. So thanks for that introduction. Jakob, can you give us a few words about yourself?
Yeah, so I also have a background in engineering, and I've started being like an entrepreneur when I started building a huge development team for one of the biggest e-commerce companies in Europe. And the recruitment, it was in like almost 11 years ago. It was really a pain in the neck based on the number of the candidates we were receiving, and building that you know, like an effective process without good HR tech solutions was really a nightmare. We were not able to find good solutions for the candidate screening in terms of the engineering skills of the software engineers. So we decided to build one, and that's what I'm doing for the last 10 years. When really I see this HR tech stack from inside, and also like from the perspective of our customers, and that's the knowledge that I would like to share today. So yeah, that's about me.
Awesome. Thanks very much for those introductions, guys. So we do have a lot to get through today, so I will be getting started in just a moment. But before we do, I'm going to launch our first poll, which should be appearing on everyone's screens now. So the question is, how many HR technologies are currently utilized in your organization? First response is none. We rely on manual HR processes, 1 to 2, 3 to 5, 6 or more. No. We'll let the votes come through.
I'm really curious to see the results of this, actually.
Yes. We got a close one, actually, but there is looking like there's going to be a clear winner. So a couple more. I can see there's more participants than votes. So if you haven't voted yet, guys, drop them in. Okay. All right. I'm going to end the poll and share the results. So should be able to see that on your screen now. So we have a clear winner here with 49%, 1 to 2 HR technologies. We also got quite a lot of votes for 3 to 5 HR technologies with 39%, but also some for none and some for 6 or more. So it's very interesting. We've got quite a wide variety of responses, which is going to bode well actually for our first question, which I'll point towards you, Kuba. So we're talking today about HR tech, and I wanted to sort of get your perspective on how HR tech has evolved over the years, and what's the typical level of integration of HR tech at the modern organization?
Okay, so basically the first thing is that, when we see such a results like 1 people or maybe 6 people responsible for HR tech, it would be great to be able to cross it with the size of the organization. Because I believe that the size of the organization is key to the answer related to the HR tech, how sophisticated it is for a given company. If you have a smaller company that is 10 people agency, the need for the HR tech is usually lower and smaller compared to the big companies. With the big companies, the technologies that are supporting the automated processes is a must. So I expect, and that's my assumption, that the number of people really correlates to the number of the employees and the size of the company. So I'm not saying that smaller companies don't have the good quality HR tech implementations, because it really depends. We work with very different companies, from small 50 people startups to companies having 50,000 employees. And it really depends right now. So there are companies where we ask them about what are the measures related to their current processes, what are the KPIs, they have it. And there are many companies who have no idea how many candidates they had the last year. So that's the problem. What I see right now is that more and more companies are automating the processes using the technology, but the level of integration is very, very different. And it's really there is no easy answer to that, because I know big companies who are based on Jira in terms of their whole HR processes, and there are companies who are using ATSs, which should be the default solution for the recruitment. But what I'm seeing right now is that more and more companies are trying to be a data-driven company in terms of HR, and of course, having one place where you have the reliable data that you can use to figure out where and how you should automate the process or invest into the optimizing this process, automating them. That's a must. And I would say that just the tool here is less important than having a good data. So that's how I see that. Very different, depends on the companies, depends on the regions, depends on the let's say the dynamic of the growth of the company, because even we have a huge company and they are not hiring actively, they are just hiring replacements for the people who are leaving the company. It will be very different even compared to the 100 people company who wants to grow 4 times in the next year. So that's my answer to that.
Awesome. Yeah,
I think if I can just add really quickly, that's a really good point about the size of the company and kind of their growth targets or growth trajectory playing a huge part in this. One area where I see HR tech playing a crucial role for smaller companies is to enable that growth. Because when you're talking about growing pains in terms of scaling an organization, that is most of the time, I would say, probably on the people side, right? On the HR side. And that's where HR tech can really enable even a small company to grow very rapidly without necessarily having to kind of scale the HR team linearly with that growth. So yeah, that's
especially that it's not easy to scale the HR team. Especially in the small company, it's usually much more effective to buy a tool that can automate some processes and save these FTEs for the people who will do like the real job. I'm not saying that HR is not doing a real job. I'm saying that part of the job that can be done by HR, you can automate that, and it's usually much cheaper, much better, much more effective compared to just scaling the team, as you said. So yeah, fully agree.
Yeah. We definitely got a little bit to go through today, talking about automation and AI, and also about how it plays a factor in decision making. So for those of you joining, stick around because we've got a lot to go there later on in today's discussion. Sort of elaborating on this point, CJ, I'll switch it over to you now. Talking about and looking at actually the poll, we saw quite a wide variety of responses, all the way from none to 6 or more. So there is probably not a clear-cut answer to this. But in your opinion, what does the modern HR tech stack look like?
Yeah, I think this was really interesting to see in the poll, actually, that the majority, or almost the majority, 49%, were using 1 or 2 solutions. And I'd be curious to know if that's because they're using some very, very broad solutions that try to do pretty much everything there, or that maybe they've only kind of started dipping their toes into the water and have like one area where they've focused on implementing HR tech in their companies, because it is a very, very broad area there that covers basically the entire breadth of the organization in different ways. So maybe it starts for most companies with kind of a general HRIS, so HR information system that is basically a database of all the employee information to keep track of that. That's where I've seen a lot of companies start, or maybe they start more from the recruiting side or talent acquisition with an applicant tracking system. But then there's also the employer branding aspects of talent acquisition, might be in the same tool, or it could be a separate one. And then we come to assessment, of course, which is a key area as well that can be very specialized. So assessing a technical candidate or developer, as you know, a dev skiller can be very different from assessing a salesperson, for example. So there's lots of different types of tools for that, as well as some more generalized aptitude tests or things like that. Then we get into, okay, so now we have the people employed, we've recruited them, but how do we now get them up to speed and onboard them in a good way? There are a lot of different tools for that. And then continuing kind of their growth in their roles with learning and development tools. And then crucially, performance management tools, providing goal setting and feedback and managing one-on-ones and all of that. And then measuring all of that to make sure that your employees are happy and fulfilled and doing their best work in the company through employee engagement tools and things like that. So yeah, it goes into pretty much every area of the company, I would say, covering lots of different perspectives and angles.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, from beginning to end, you could say. I think both of our companies, Upskilling and Team Taylor, could say.
Yeah. Offboarding is another.
Offboarding, but that's what I was about to say, because the only one that I think maybe that we missed over was offboarding, because it's literally end to end these days with HR tech. That's for sure. Thanks for that response. I'll move on, because we got a lot. We got more polls coming. We got some of these more juicy topics with AI and stuff coming later as well that we really want to dig deeper into. But I'll come back over to you, Cooper, and you touched on this with your first response about HR tech and the level of integration it has with certain sort of areas of sort of the process. But what are some of the challenges you think that HR professionals face today when it comes to leveraging technology to streamline processes like talent acquisition, talent management, even performance management, as CJ just said there?
Yeah, I believe that crucial element here is like, ensuring that the employee adoption for this is on a good level, because usually in the companies there is this level of the resistance for the change. So you implement the tool, but then you need to be sure that this tool is used by people, because having a tool that is not used, it doesn't mean that you implemented or integrated the HR tech solution. So I've seen many times when the companies were using a tool, like even for the leave management, and then people were still resisting to do that, and they were still continuing writing on the slide, I had tomorrow I will be off, instead of using a tool. So I would say that the first and the biggest challenge is to ensure that the culture of the company is supporting this the implementation of the HR tech processes, because as CJ mentioned, the culture and how people if people understand why you are implementing a particular tools, why you are automating some processes, that's the key and the most important element here. So that's the first thing. The second thing is that often not having a clear reason for implementing the tool runs into two other problems. First is that it's harder to get a buy-in from the C-level when they will support this approach, and they will really give you a budget for implementing this tool, because they are not sure what are the results, or what results do you expect. And sometimes we have customers who are saying, okay, we want to implement DevSkiller. And when you ask them what's the reason for that, and what are the results that you're trying to achieve, they're saying, yeah, we want to have a better candidate experience, or more optimized process, but without any measurement. So there are no hard KPIs that you will say, okay, we did manage to improve the cost of the single hire, or quality of the hire, or whatever. They're just saying, yeah, it's better right now. So that's the problem, especially when you need to talk to CFO of the company, and you're saying, yeah, we need $20,000 to make it better, and you will be happy. It's not how it works. So that's the thing. And also, last but not least, if you are not having any data-driven approach, and you are not having KPIs, it often runs into the over-automation. So I'm automating the processes that really are not important for me. And if I have a process that takes me 5 minutes every month, then spending 2 weeks on automating that doesn't make sense, right? Because the cost of the automation is much higher even than the cumulative cost of doing this process. So that's the problem. And also, one more time, when you go to the C-level of the CFO of the company, and you tell them hey, we need to automate this process, without being clear what's the cost of this process, what's the effort, how many people are involved, how many FTEs can we save or move to the other areas, and that's the problem. And that's the key challenge, I believe, that HR people need to face when they want to implement the HR tech solution. And I believe it's pretty general, so it applies to everyone else. If we want to buy a new tool for project management, then we need to know what are the results that we want to achieve, which KPIs will be positively or negatively affected with that, and then just make a decision based on the numbers and explain these numbers to the employees. Because I will tell you, Justin, we need to use different CRM system, but thanks to that you will achieve this and this and this. It will be much easier for you to change and adapt to this new one, instead of comparing the situation where I tell you, Justin, we need to implement a new CRM system because I've been on the conference and they say it's great. It's not how it works.
Exactly.
Yeah.
No, for sure. All right, thanks for that, Kuba. I want to sort of swing it around in the other sort of angle now, CJ. We're looking at the challenges. So as Kuba elaborated on there, but from your perspective, how can HR tech help enhance these processes, talent acquisition, employee engagement, performance management, even onboarding, offboarding? What's your perspective here?
Yeah, first of all, I loved your answer there, Kuba, and I think that goes in here as well, because it's all about that employee experience. Even when it comes to, that's the challenge, of course, to getting that right and focusing on that. But then if you do get that right, I think that's where we have a lot of the potential to really improve the employee experience in all of these different areas. And I think one of the keys for that is to like really focus on the human touch still. So yes, we are in some ways replacing manual processes and things with technology, but we should never lose sight of the humanity in those processes. And I think that goes like one key, that's something you should think about when choosing tools as well. Like what's the user experience like here? What's the employee experience going to be like using this tool? Will this be a joy for our users to use, which means that they are much more likely to actually use it and adopt it, like Kuba was saying. But then that will also enrich and enhance their whole experience. And a few key areas where I think the technology actually enables this in a way that maybe the manual processes and alternatives don't is the focus on transparency and collaboration by collecting data and opening it up and making it more accessible to people across the organization. It's not just, you know, living in a binder on in someone's cabinet or things like that. Inviting more people across the company to collaborate on recruitment and having open and transparent performance goals for people so that they can have a clarity and shared understanding about where they're going as a company. So all of these things, I think, are the really big benefits that HR tech enables of creating that kind of alignment within a company through transparency and collaboration, but with a human touch. And then there's, of course, the incredibly important and very concrete benefit and cost saving of just automation, which is just incredibly powerful, as everyone knows, being able to save hours every day for lots of different tasks that you might have been doing manually. One of my like biggest aha moments in recruitment was going from, you know, booking interviews manually with candidates and going back and forth and what time is good for you and how about this one and all of that. And even though that was using, you know, technology in the sense that we were using email and Google Calendar and so on, there was still this very manual process. And then going to an automated way of booking meetings with Calendar, where you can just send them an invite and they can pick one of the free slots that the interviewer has made available, and it books everything in their calendar, and you have the video call ready to go. And that just saves literally hours out of every day doing that. And that's just like one tiny example. And there are so many of those. So obviously that's a huge benefit and a huge potential for improving the overall experience of using it.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, thanks for that. Cool. Anything you wanted to add here before we move along?
No, I'm good with the answer we listened to.
Okay. That well-rounded, so we're good to move on. Thanks for that, CJ. But it is interesting, you know, even such a small thing you think, but if you add all of those candidates together, that's like quite literally hours in the day. So for sure. Okay, I believe we're up to the second poll we have today, and I'm going to get this up on the screen now. Okay, here we go. So the question is, to what extent does your organization involve AI in its HR processes? We have 4 responses again. We do not use AI in our HR processes. We are exploring the potential of AI in HR. We have implemented AI in specific HR functions or processes. AI is extensively integrated into multiple HR processes across our organization. And I can see about half of you have voted so far, so I'm going to let it go a little bit longer. Now, this one is going to be a lot to talk about here. Just wait until you see the results, guys. This is going to be a good one. Anyway, still a few more to go, guys. If you still haven't voted, and as you're voting, I'll just remind everyone as well, we do have a Q&A session. So the chat, please use the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. You can drop your questions in there, and we will ask them to the panelists at the last few minutes of the webinar. Okay, the votes have stopped, so I'm going to end the poll and share the results. Now, I did say it was interesting. We've got almost a 3-way tie, I would say, between the first 3 responses. So 35% for we do not use AI, 29% for we're exploring the potential of AI, but haven't implemented it yet. And we have as well 35% for we have implemented AI in specific HR functions or processes. Now, we did get a single vote actually for AI is extensively used. So there is someone out there who's listening that is using AI extensively, which is also interesting to see.
Could have been an AI that responded to that.
It might have been, yeah, it might have been exactly. So, all right. So we've got a little bit to talk about here, but I'll start with you, Kuba. And I guess this is probably the first question that comes to mind for those of you who haven't implemented it or aren't using AI at all in your processes. So we want to look at the potential risks and challenges associated with the increased reliance of AI in HR tech. So what are some of your suggestions for sort of mitigating these challenges and risks with using AI?
It depends what we mean by AI, because often, we have machine learning algorithms and we are saying AI because, it looks cool and it's much more sophisticated. But basically, I believe that the biggest issue, especially in HR, is that AI is a black box, right? So we do not know what are the rules that AI is using to make decisions, right? So we need to be very clear as a vendors of the AI tools for HR to ensure which, for example, elements are used to make decisions and how much information do we pass to AI algorithms when we want them to support us, right? So in terms of the decision making, it's a black box. So it can be a problem that, for example, we'll have affected diversity because our AI algorithms will prefer some people over the other, and we won't be sure, and we even won't realize that until it's too late. So that's the first risk. And here it's of course important to verify what informations are provided for AI on machine learning engines to make a decision. Like we have an AI benchmarking engine at DevScaler, which is trying to predict if the candidate is likely or unlikely to succeed, but we know that it's fully based on the technical information, and only this technical information are fed into the AI model. So if you want to use any tool, any AI tool, ensure that you will understand what are the rules, or maybe even not rules, but what are the entry points that this tool is using to make decisions. If you are talking about the general tools, like for example, as CJ mentioned, scheduling meetings with the candidates, that's also the perfect solution for AI, or even like a chatbots, or a voice bot that is calling candidates saying, "Hey, it's CJ. Can we schedule a meeting?" And it's done fully automatically, with integration to your calendar. So that's it. Also, some elements of using AI as a kind of even avatars for onboarding purposes, when there are some things that you need to explain how to apply for the sick leave, or how you can buy new equipment, and that's where we can use AI as a part of HR and administration areas. But the most important thing for me is to ensure how it works and what are the parameters that these engines are using to make a decision or support your processes.
Yeah, certainly. I think it's a risk everyone's a little bit worried about. Definitely. Thanks, Kuba. CJ, what's your perspective on this one?
Yeah, I totally agree with Kuba here, as well as that being kind of the primary risk that I've been concerned about, and that we've been thinking about a lot here as well. And there's an additional kind of compliance or a legal layer to that as well when it comes to handling of personal data, and where do you send that, and so on, that you need to take into account. The way I think about it is that I divide it up into two different use cases for AI. One is the more generative AI, where you're using artificial intelligence to create new things, and just the large language models and interfaces to that, like ChatGPT is a good example of where you're getting help actually creating things. And then there's the more reductive AI, where you're using artificial intelligence to more analyze the information and maybe even make decisions, right? Filtering out candidates, for example, or things like that. And it's the second part where I see the biggest risk when it comes to kind of this alignment issue with AI, where you're not sure of what potential biases this model might have been trained on. And from what I've seen so far, it seems like unless the company producing these models have a very advanced approach to this alignment issue, which is still in its infancy, like this is bleeding edge for all of these companies. No one has figured that out yet, I don't think. The way that these large language models and so on work is that they kind of reinforce the biases that is in the data that they've been trained on. And since most of them have been trained on the internet as a whole in many ways, which is not the most unbiased place, general, that's a huge risk, especially when it comes to this kind of reductive use of AI that, or decision-making use of AI that Kuba mentioned. So I totally agree with that. The approach that we take at Teamtailor is to focus more on the generative side, because that feels easier, to be honest, at this stage of the development of AI, where we think of implementing it as kind of a co-pilot that will assist you in creating the materials that you might be using for your recruitment. That could be using it to help you create employer branding material. That could be to help you suggest questions to ask in an interview based on the requirements profile that you, or competency profile that you've set up for that job, and things like that, where it'll make suggestion on, here's a question that you might want to ask, or here are the skills that you might want to look for in this role based on the job description that you wrote, and so on. But then ultimately leaving all of the decision making, even if they want to use those questions or not, up to the humans still, because right now that still feels like a safer bet. Not to say that we humans don't have our own biases, but I really like what you said, Kuba, about kind of the black box nature of AI. Like that's the hard part. I think it's hard to see and understand and reason and adjust for the biases that might be in these models.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, and thinking about just the industry in general, there's been always such a heavy emphasis on reducing bias and promoting diversity and all these sorts of things. And then now we're kind of the shift towards AI. There is this huge risk sitting there that after all this hard work of trying to really address this issue, and we're going to kind of be back where we started in somewhat with what these models are based off, basically. So yeah,
and I think that's really interesting. I understand the desire to use technology in this way, because it seems like that could be less biased, because we all know that we are flawed as human beings and have lots of biases, conscious and unconscious. And so using AI or technology to help make those decisions seems like it could be less biased, but so far that does not seem to be the case. It kind of seems to be the opposite, actually, which is scary.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, we're going to move along to Kuba. Do you have anything else there, or shall we?
No, we can move on.
Okay. All right, so I'm just double checking where we are. Yes, we do have one more poll, which I'm going to share on your screen now. So it's going to elaborate a little bit more onto this point about talking about AI and how this sort of impacts our decision making. So this poll is purely centered on decision making. And I'll read it out again for everybody. So which statement best reflects your opinion on the role of HR tech in decision making? HR tech should be the primary driver, providing data-driven insights for all decisions. HR tech should play a significant role, but human judgment and experience should be the final factor. HR tech should be a supplementary tool, with human decision-making prevailing in most cases. Or HR tech should have a minimal role. Decisions should primarily rely on human judgment and experience. Now, this is obviously quite a juicy one when we talk about HR tech in general, but of course we can keep the conversation going on about AI here as well, because at the end of the day, we kind of alluded to this point a little bit here. And I'll allow the votes to come through. Still, about half of you to go again. So I'll let it go for a few seconds longer and share the results. Okay, how are we looking? Panelists, you should have been able to vote as well. I didn't ask for this time. Did you get the chance to vote, CJ and Kuba?
No, unfortunately.
Not. That's strange. It didn't give me the option to do that this time. We'll look into that. Anyway, all right, I'm going to end the poll and share the results. So this time I would say we have a bit of a clear winner. So option number 2, HR tech should play a significant role, but human judgment and experience should still be the final factor. So 56% of you voted for that. We got 36% of you voting HR tech should be a supplementary tool with human decision-making prevailing in most cases. And then a couple of votes for both the minimal role for decisions and should be the primary driver. We actually got 5% versus 3% for that. So I'll stop sharing the screen there. And I will dive into our next question, which I'll bring it back to you, Kuba. So we've looked at the poll and we've been discussing AI as well previously. So what's your opinion about HR analytics and data-driven decision-making in HR processes? What role should it play in your opinion?
Yeah, so as I mentioned, at the beginning, if you want to implement the tool or you want to automate the process, you need to know what's the status quo, right? As our webinar, the subject for today. So the problem is that, there is this famous quote, you can't manage what you can't measure. So if you are talking about data-driven approach, it's a must for me to be a data-driven or even data-obsessed in terms of being able to, effectively invest our efforts, invest money, buy tools into the places which will really make a change, right? And they will really improve the process instead of just implementing the tool for implementing the tools. There are some companies who instead of hiring people, they just prefer to run the hiring processes forever, right? Because then everyone have a job and everyone is happy. So the same here, without good analytics, it's hard to know, for example, imagine that you want to hire a new software developer and you're using 10 different job boards for posting the ads, right? Without good analytics, how can you know which job board is more effective? Which job board is producing you better candidates? Because sometimes let's say analytics are on a very initial level. So I know that from this job board, I had 50 applications and from this one I had 10. But maybe the conversion ratio is that from these 10 applications, I've hired 5 people and out of these 50 applications, I've hired 2 or no one, right? So we should really look for the output KPIs and optimize the process as a whole instead of just optimizing the particular elements, because we can optimize for the local maximum, right? So if we'll figure out in the number of applications, then I can invest into the wrong job board that is providing me candidates, but is not providing me new hires. And I should focus on that. So defining a good KPIs and realizing that not always the first or most available metric is the best one, but looking for the success metrics, but success defined as from the business perspective of the company, right? Having candidates, it's not a success for the company. Having new good hires that are not quitting after the trial period, that's the success for the company, especially if after 1 or 2 years after the performance evaluation, you can say, yeah, these were the good hires, right? Mm-hmm. So I would say that's the most important element is to have the data and base that allows us to base our actions on the facts instead of gut feelings or assumptions that, yeah, I believe that should be. Every time when you say, yeah, I believe it's better, it means that we have no idea if we have improved anything. If I'm asking a customer how your process looks like after desk care, and they're saying, yeah, it's much better. And I say, okay, so how it affected your recruitment pace or duration of the whole recruitment process? And they say, yeah, it improved it, but they are not able to say by 13% or by 80%, then we know it's a gut feeling that, yeah, it's better. So that's how I would set it. You really need to be based on the hard numbers and you really need to define it with the most output KPIs that you can find to ensure that you're optimizing the whole process or the whole area instead of optimizing some small elements of the process.
Yeah. It's not just about implementing the tool; it's about measuring its success from the word go. So, CJ, I'm not sure if you wanted to add anything there, or we move along.
I agree with that. I think most HR teams that I've seen at least are spread quite thin, trying with a very small team to support maybe quite a large organization. And so I think one area where being able to make data-driven decisions is hugely important as well, like at a large level, is in terms of just prioritization. Like what should you be focusing on as an HR team? And that goes from which of all of these different areas that we talked about in the beginning, from recruiting to engagement, performance management, onboarding, learning, all of that, like which areas should you focus on first, and then kind of digging into those. Okay, so what are the actual things that you need to address first there? So yeah, using it as a way to kind of narrow down the huge amount of things that you could be doing to forming hypotheses about where do we think will have the most amount of impact, and prioritizing that, and then actually measuring if you were able to have that impact or not, and in what way. And yeah, so that's a key part for it too, I think.
Nice. Awesome. Okay, so we've got a few questions left, and I saw a question come through in the Q&A there as well. So if anyone has any other questions, please fire them in there so we can get to them at the end. CJ, I'll stay with you. And we're thinking about the key considerations for organizations when integrating different HR tech platforms and tools. So in your opinion, what are some of the considerations we should think about? We talk about obviously measuring, we've kind of touched on that, but anything else you can think of in this space?
Well, I'll go back to, first of all, what Kuba was saying in the beginning about really focusing on the user experience, because a tool is only good when it's actually being used. So driving that employee adoption is critical, obviously. So really start focusing on that and taking into account how easy is it to get started with this tool, and will employees or candidates actually enjoy using this? Because if you miss there, nothing else is going to matter, pretty much. Another key component, I think, is to think about how will this fit into this larger kind of ecosystem of maybe different tools that we have in all of these different areas that we talked about in the beginning as well. What's the can you integrate them so that they can work together in a seamless way, so that you don't have to do a lot of manual work across different systems to kind of tie them together? I think that's a huge point as well, where there's a lot of gains to be made in terms of both efficiency, but also that kind of seamless user experience or employee experience. So that's really important. And then I think it's very important to think about the fact that software is not static. It's not about implementing something here and now, and then that's all it's ever going to be, because, well, first of all, your organization is probably not static either. So the organization will change over time, but software is not static either. The software has the ability, especially now with the whole software as a service based concept that pretty much the entire industry has moved to. You really got to be thinking about how the software will adapt and grow over time as well. I think, will you be able to grow with the solution that you're selecting, and will it be able to grow with you? So thinking about it from both of those sides. How quickly is this tool improving? Do we think that this is something that will remain kind of stagnant and other tools will kind of bypass it, and that will basically have meant we maybe bet on the wrong horse, so to speak? So taking that into account, I think, is really important as well. And of course, this is really demonstrated quite dramatically now with a big shift that we have with AI, where the tools that don't implement this in a good way are going to be outdated quite soon, I think. So yeah, taking those things into account is really important. And then, of course, things like security and compliance, we should not forget about here either, because when we're talking about HR tech, we're talking about quite often sensitive personal data that need to be protected, and we need to be able to trust our vendors that that they will handle that in a responsible and secure way. And that could mean that if you're based in the EU, looking at EU solutions first, it could make your life a lot easier when it comes to GDPR and things like that. Although we're seeing some movement now with regulations starting to open up a little bit in these areas. So yeah, we'll see what happens going forward, but that's definitely something to keep in mind as well.
Okay. Thank you very much. All right, so we've got one question left today before we get into the Q&A, and I'll start with you, Kuba, this time. So we've gone through everything with HR tech, where it's began, sort of the level of integration, the typical HR tech stack, even AI, and how this sort of impacts decision making and so on. And basically, I want to get your opinion now about where you see the industry developing as a whole. So what are some of the predictions you foresee with HR tech moving forward?
Okay, so HR tech is a very broad topic, but I believe that what's happening right now with this whole skill gap and digital skill gap is that the first thing is that we need to redefine a little bit the talent acquisition strategy. So far the talent acquisition mostly focused on the external candidates. So I'm posting a job ad, I'm collecting the candidates, I'm interviewing them and hiring the best. Or the most effective ones. And right now it's more to redefine it with, I would say, activating the internal talent marketplace. So with the regular recruitment, we know that it's not enough to post job ads. You also need to do a direct search and sourcing of the candidates on LinkedIn, etc. But even having that in mind, we are not doing the same for the internal mobility. So in the internal mobility, usually companies end up on posting the job ad on the intranet site, and they're saying, yeah, if you want to apply, just apply. We believe that, or I believe that, activating this internal talent marketplace and also sourcing for the best people and poaching even these people from different teams is something that we really need to do, especially in terms of all of the new job roles that will appear related to AI, related to being data driven, to business analytics, ESG, etc. So that's where we need to activate that and really redefine our talent acquisition strategies. So that's the one thing. The second thing is, of course, the huge trend right now is ESG. And I believe that, I don't know, implementing a carbon footprint into the HR tech areas is something that needs to happen at some times. And because more and more companies are caring about the environment and putting bees in the office is not enough usually, and we really need to focus on that. So that's the other thing. And also, I believe that new generations that are entering the job market, like Generation Z, we really need to learn how to work with them. And as CJ mentioned, the software is it's not static; it's changing. And we also know that I'm 40. So I'm using tools and the internet in a very different way compared to the people who we are hiring right now, and they have 20 few years old. So there is this generation gap that we really need to work on. So yeah, I would say that these are the areas that we really need to develop. So ESG, new definition of the talent acquisition, and being able to work with both Generation Z and also people who are already at their 60s or I don't know 70s, and there are some areas where they still want to work or need to work, and comparing this different perspective in the single tool, it's really demanding.
Yeah, definitely. It's a funny sort of perspective when you think about there was this education for older people trying to use the internet and use software and all these sorts of things now. And it's almost like this swing has happened that we need to educate ourselves about how it's to be used, not just how to start using it, but the new way of using it. Basically, it's definitely a consideration, and that's something that's going to continue to develop, because you've got kids in school that, haven't even entered the job market yet, that have a completely different perspective to those that are just entering the job market as well. So it is a good point, and something that we should consider for sure. CJ,
yeah, and TikTok for employer branding, right?
Yeah, TikTok for employer branding, or posting ads on TikTok or whatever it could be. It's just it's a new world, that's for sure. So
CJ, you should check out our new feature in Team Tailor called Team Stories, which is basically TikTok for employer branding.
There you go.
So I totally agree with that.
Beat us to it. So what's your opinion, CJ, on the future of the industry?
Yeah, I think the remarks you made, Kuba, about kind of that internal mobility and the talent marketplace is a really good point. I completely agree with that as well. And I think that also applies to your hiring in general, where I think it's more, so things are changing very, very rapidly. And that's where we have this kind of need to upskill or reskill. So that's true for all of us internally, but that's also true when you're hiring candidates, that it's not as much about focusing on finding the right skill for doing the job that's right in front of you right now. It's more about hiring for potential, for the people that will be able to grow with the company and adapt as things change. So I think that's something that's becoming more and more important as well. That goes very much hand in hand with that kind of internal mobility as well. Some other things that I've thought about when it comes to this, going back to what we talked about this very broad landscape of HR tech, I think we'll continue to see kind of a splintering of two different approaches to tackle this, which is basically the one that focuses on consolidation, where you have these big software suites that try to do everything and collect all of these things in one solution. And there are some benefits to that. And then there are some real big cons to that as well. And then the other side, which is more the smaller specialized solutions that do one or a few things, but do them really, really well. And that then focus on integrating with other tools to kind of form one cohesive package that will solve kind of that whole breadth. So picking which direction suits you as a company, I think is a important thing and I think we'll see that crystallize as HR tech continues to kind of expand into more and more areas. Another thing that I've been thinking about a lot is how the tools keep improving at such a rapid pace. And now we have AI accelerating that even further, and increased automation leading to much improved efficiency. What this means is that it's letting managers and individual contributors just do more on their own, basically reducing the need for support functions. And you were talking about this, Kuba, earlier as well, that there's less need for people teams to actually do the HR work, so to speak, because the rest of the organization can be more self-sufficient with better tools in many processes, not all of them, but in many of them. So I think that changes the role of HR in companies as well. It's not about HR admin and things like that anymore. It's much more about acting as guides and consultants and experts that can really enable the rest of the organization through technology and through training. And so I think that's a big shift that we're seeing, that's also been accelerated over the last year with all the layoffs we've been seeing in companies, starting really in a lot of tech companies, at least with talent acquisition and so on, because when you're no longer growing, they tighten or reduce the size of those departments a lot. And so as a talent acquisition specialist or HR generalist, I think that's something you need to think about for the future. Like, what's your future role in HR going to be? And I think it's more towards that kind of guide or coach role, where you can enable teams through technology and training.
Yeah, well put. Well put. Okay, we've got a few questions in the Q&A, so I'm going to jump to them now. And I mean, I guess I can start it. we're with you, CJ, so we can start with you first. So the first question here is, in your experience, what are the top 3 recruitment KPI metrics every hiring team should follow up with? Something that could add value to any type of company and or industry.
Yeah. My favorite one is something that Kuba alluded to earlier as well, and that's quality of hire. Was this a successful hire or not? And actually keeping track of that, and then being able to look back and analyze basically the criteria that you based your decision on. Did we make a correct decision based on these criteria? Or were we using the correct criteria? Are we looking for the right things? If it turned out that that you thought it was a great hire, but it ended up not being a good match, for example. And that's something that you can't really measure only during the recruitment process. Again, you have to actually wait and see how quickly does this employee get up to speed and start really performing in the role. Do they leave during the probation period or not? Maybe using performance reviews or other types of performance management to connect that back to the recruitment process and kind of validate the assumptions that you made during the recruitment process. So that's the number one for me. That's by far the most important one. Then I think if you have that, then I think going back to kind of the attraction side of the things, or the acquisition side of things, like where are you finding your candidates and trying to optimize that. And again, measuring the quality of various channels that you're using rather than just the quantity is key there as well. And seeing how you can improve that. So it's all about kind of connecting the dots through the entire journey.
Sure.
That's only 2, but really, I think those are the main ones that matter. Then there are more granular ones that you could be looking into, like digging into referrals that you're getting from your company and trying to boost that, but crucially measuring actually the quality of the results that you're getting from that as well can be really interesting. And yeah, those would be my kind of top picks.
I mean, we can do this. Thanks very much, CJ. We could do this as kind of a quick fire, because I guess we kind of alluded to it there with CJ's response, but kind of a follow-up question to the question there was, how can you define a sound recruitment strategy? How do you define successful recruitment process? So maybe some of the quick fire metrics or processes, Kuba, on your side. What in your opinion is a measurement of success of a good recruitment?
Yes, with the measurement of the success, I would agree with the metrics provided by CJ. I believe these are the most important. The thing that I will add here as well is that what I mentioned before, redefining the talent acquisition strategy, where talent doesn't mean an external candidate, but focusing on people that you have internally. That's the approach that is implemented right now by more and more companies. Even at DevScale right now, we are supporting the skills measurement and skills management, not only in the recruitment process, but we treat our employees that we have at the companies as well as a great source of the candidates. And it's even better source because you are sure with these people that you already have a culture fit. And the culture fit is very, very important, especially with the smaller companies, because if you have a company that have 50,000 people, the culture fit is important. But if you have a company that is 20 people, then the culture fit is critical, and you can really destroy the company with one bet higher. And that's the problem when we often believe that the people that just send us the resume, and this resume looks so good, they are great people and they're better than the people that we have right now. And I believe giving people the possibility to develop internally inside the company, do things that they want to do, and treat the career more as a kind of a climbing wall where you can move in different directions and still have fun, even if at the end you are on the top. Is much better than having a classical ladder when you get hired one company, you spend there 5 years, then you move to the other company to the different position. I believe it's still better to work in a single company. And even right now, Deloitte is talking a lot about the skill-based operating model or skills-based hiring. And I believe right now we are more and more focused on the skills rather than the job titles. And that especially right now, when as CJ mentioned, the dynamics of the software environment or the products is so huge, and even right now boosted by the AI, that it's much better to focus on the skills, and instead of spending the time on tagging people, it would be better to go with that. So yeah, that's how I would approach that.
Okay, we've got 2 more questions. So we're getting right on time. So just if you could answer this one as effectively and quickly as you can, CJ, I'll point it back to you. So the question here is, I understand the value of HR tech from an operational efficiency and risk compliance point of view. Could you provide experiences or real examples from a profitability, increased revenue perspective, please?
Well, one that comes to mind immediately would be, how do you determine the success of your salespeople, and how do you make sure that you hire or that you increase the chances of hiring high-performing salespeople? And so it goes back to that kind of quality of hire and performance management working kind of in tandem. So using HR tools for performance management to make sure that you're kind of setting people up for success and then measuring the results from that, and then tying all of that back to the recruitment process and digging into what are the skills and traits that enable that success, or that our top salespeople have in common, for example, and then incorporating that into the recruitment process to make sure that that's what you're actually searching for, and that you're not going by your gut and saying, oh, this sales guy plays golf just like me, that he seems like a good guy, or that's the I don't think people really work that way anymore, but that's kind of the classic example, I guess.
Sure.
That's a short answer.
Short answer, yeah. Thank you very much.
I would add one more very short answer to that. I believe that the important thing is that think about efficiency, right? If we can spend less time on interviewing people, and instead of having 10 FTEs interviewing candidates, we can use 2 FTEs. It means that this 8 FTEs can do the real job, and they can generate the revenue for us. So reducing waste is one of the most important elements here, I believe. And I answered on the 4th question.
Yeah, I was going to say, yeah, the 4th question about a tech certification course. Look no further than DevSkiller. We've got one on free. Yeah. On just type in DevSkiller tech certification course. You'll find it on Google. Okay, so we are only 1 minute over time, which I think all in all is a pretty good result. So thank you very much, everybody, for joining. At our maximum, we had 74 attendees today, so we'll be donating €5 per person to the Ukrainian Humanitarian Aid Fund after this for your attendance. So thank you for joining. And I'd like to also thank CJ and Jakub for your insights today. I hope everybody learned something and had a good time. So thank you guys very much once again. And we will see you all next time. So thank you very much, guys. And
thank you very much. Have a nice day. Bye-bye.
Guys, before we go, those of you on YouTube, if you want to catch the recording, just email us at hello@devskiller.com and we can issue the recording as well. I forgot, for those of you who are joining us on YouTube. So thank you very much, everybody, once again, and take care.